I was very disappointed when I heard that Charles Oliveira had to pull out of the fight against Makhachev set to take place at UFC 294. I was very excited to see Bronx get a second crack at Makhachev. I was on location covering UFC 291 all fight week long and was sitting cage side for Oliveira's last fight against Dariush, and I honestly believe that if the Makhachev were the fight the Oliveira I saw that night, then we'd be looking at yet another TKO or submission win on Bronx's record. But that's a moot point now, and as bothersome as it was to hear about the pulling out of Oliveira, there is no better substitute for this title fight than Alexander Volkanovski entering the picture. What more can you say about Volk? Simply put, he's an admirable guy that deserves every bit of praise and increase in stock he's going to get as he steps in to take on this fight on just 12 days' notice, against a fighter Makhachev that is every bit as dangerous as his public image suggests. Just after the announcement of this fight, Volk took to his YouTube channel to give his reaction to the news, and there were a number of things he said that really stood out to me. He talked about how he always claimed to be an anytime, anywhere type of guy, and that this would be his chance to prove it. This is a point that really resonated with me personally, and I have to imagine a lot of the fan base as well. Because the reality is, what a fighter says in front of the camera and on social media, and what they do and say behind the scenes are two very different things. I think a lot of the fan base don't realize the extent of this. By no means is this a criticism of fighters who say one thing and do the other. It's easy for me to sit here with my arms crossed and disparage someone managing their public image in relation to the moves they actually make when it comes time to negotiate. But the whole thing of being a professional fighter at the highest level is far more complex than a lot of the casual fan base realizes. And there is so much more involved going on that is ever made public. So perhaps that's why it reflects so well on Volkanovski that he's proving that he's one of the people in the rare percentile who is an anytime, anywhere type of guy by stepping up for an incredibly dangerous fight on such short notice. No matter what the outcome of the fight itself is, the decision he made to do this is very valuable and meaningful to the fan base and the promotion, and it's going to pay off regardless. As for the circumstances surrounding the fight itself, despite the fact that it can be viewed as though there really is no pressure on him for this one, it's still a dangerous proposition to be looking at. Having to face Islam Makhachev after he's had a full camp preparing for October 21st in Abu Dhabi is a tall order, to say the least. Volk is going to need all the conditioning he can get because, although the first fight was very competitive, the conditioning played a major role in allowing him to do what he did. Assuming he's going to be entering this fight with not as strong of a gas tank is a critical factor in how things are going to play out on Saturday. A fight between two elite talents in the most talent-rich division in the sport is so incredibly complex to analyze because there are just so many details to consider. In their first fight, Volk did an amazing job of closing the distance and landing punches. In the post-fight presser following that fight, he was quoted as saying that he underestimated the striking of Islam. And so did I. Upon rewatching the first affair, I was impressed with the champion's skills on the feet. He isn't a dynamic, stylish striker, but he is incredibly efficient and accurate and has an awesome ability to counter with very heavy, impactful shots. As Volk put it, he has a really good eye, and it was evident that he saw a lot of things coming that made him very effective on the counterattack. In the post-fight presser, he also talked about how he felt as though he could have capitalized more and feels like maybe he held back a little bit too much. So it has to make you wonder. Knowing this was Volk's sentiment after their first fight, does this mean that he's going to be a bit more aggressive this time around? Given the assumed lesser gas tank and feeling as though there isn't as much pressure on himself, maybe it's the approach he takes in the rematch. Something else he said in that presser that sticks out in my mind is the fact that he had expectations that Islam was going to be stronger than he was. So I can't help thinking about how his approach to this fight will differ now that he's very sure of what he's getting into this time around. Knowing what he knows now, does it mean that he's going to be willing to go to places that perhaps he avoided in the first fight? The more I analyze, the more unclear the picture becomes. Although Volk is the type of guy that always stays in shape, there's only so much you can accomplish with improving your conditioning inside of 12 days. And as mentioned, the conditioning could be the determining factor here, especially when he'll be losing at least a full day to having to get on a plane and travel to the Arab world. One thing that is worth noting is that he has an amazing support system who was ready to drop everything and get on board for this madness. Despite the fact that most of his team were in all different parts of the world and in some cases already coming off of crazy travel themselves, the level of backing he has from his coaches and his teammates is something I believe is going to provide a tremendous boost to Volk. He never really seems to be in a bad mood, but in all the interviews I've seen out of him since the announcement, he really seems to be in great spirits. He has an excited energy about him for this one, and I think it'll be advantageous that this energy won't be taxed by being strung out over the course of a few months, but condensed into just 12 days. Their first contest was a wildly entertaining fight. Just a phenomenal performance by both men, and I cannot imagine this one's going to be any different. No matter what the outcome of this one is, this fight and the events of the past week leading into it serve as yet another reminder of what an incredible individual Alexander Volkanovski is. He is setting a really good example for all the other fighters out there and proving he is exactly what he says he is. So no matter what transpires when the cage door shuts, taking this fight against Islam Makhachev is going to have a positive and lasting effect on Volkanovski's career, whether he gains another gold belt or not.